If I ask you to think about poetry, who is the first person that comes into your mind? If you're Chinese, it might be Du Fu. If you're Persian, it might be Rumi. If you're Thai, it might be Sun Thon Fu. And if you're English, it might be William Blake. And when you think about poetry, some other thoughts might pop into your mind, like poetry is difficult. It's that subject that I studied at school, something academic, something I don't really understand. Poetry is boring. But I want to try and change your mind. But first we need to ask, what is poetry? You are witnessing the moment of creation. And that's exactly what poetry means. It comes from the Greek word poiesis, which means to bring something into being which did not exist before. Creation. So that means that anything can be poetry. Children's books, music, tweets. In fact, poetry is older than literacy. We were creating poetry before writing even existed. It might just be our oldest form of communication. But this creates a problem. If every time we produce language we are creating, then everything is poetry. And if everything is poetry, then nothing is poetry. All language has a semantic meaning, logic, and we only create poetry from language when we add something very special. And that thing we add is emotion. Logic plus emotion equals poetry. Okay, that's enough theory. Let's get practical. Now, what techniques can we use to actually create emotion? Well, I'm going to show you techniques from 3 different categories: sound, imagery, and form. In the category of sound, the first thing we're going to talk about is feet and meter. Feet and meter is basically how you organize your syllables. So let's have a look at this Shakespeare, sonnet number 18. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. Now, here, Shakespeare is using something called the iambic pentameter. He has organized his syllables like the human heart. Ba-bum, 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 ba-bum. And he's using 5 of these heartbeats per line, the iambic pentameter. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? By organizing your syllables, by using feet and meter, you can create beautiful rhythms with your writing. The next way to play with sound is by using alliteration. Alliteration is basically when you repeat sounds at the beginning of connected or closely connected words. So this example here from Dr. Seuss: through 3 cheese trees, 3 free fleas flew. It's actually like a tongue twister. It's quite difficult to say this, but the alliteration, the repetition of the sounds, is a really effective way to just create interest in your language. The final way to play with sound is by using assonance. Assonance is when we repeat similar sounds between syllables. So not just at the beginning of words like with alliteration. So here I have an example from Bob Dylan. The cloak and dagger dangles, Madams, light the candles. And so you can hear that and just it creates a really strong connection between all of your language. The next category is imagery, especially metaphor. This is when we use language as a symbol. We use symbols to replace one concept with something else. Look at this example from Emily Dickinson. Hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul. Basically, she's using hope with the symbolic imagery related to a bird. It's a beautiful thing, and don't be afraid to experiment with this. There are no rules. The final category is form. Now, most people, when they visualize text, when they visualize writing something down, they think about an A4, some type of rectangular paper. But poets have never been afraid to experiment with form. Look at this example by George Herbert called Easter Wings. Now, this poem is about the ascension of the soul to heaven. And he's written the poem in the shape of a bird. Literally, the poem itself becomes a metaphor for something flying and going up. It's a beautiful thing. Now, one question you might have is, how can I find vocabulary that fits in the structures I want to use? How can I find vocabulary with the right syllables, with the right rhyming sounds, that have the right length to fit in my form? Well, that's why you need to use a really good thesaurus. A thesaurus is a dictionary of synonyms. So don't be afraid to go out there and experiment with new vocabulary and use it, because that's the best way to expand it, learn it, and use it. Now we are going to do something that we don't often do in this modern world. We are going to have an authentic experience with language. We are going to experience poetry the same way that our ancestors did for thousands of years, before electricity, before machines, before even writing. We are going to feel the power and beauty of language, even if we don't understand it. So now we're just going to turn down the lights and close our eyes and listen to some beautiful poetry from all over the world.
白金も黄金も玉も何せ無に勝れる宝子にしかめやも
เสียงลือเสียงเล่าอ้างอันใดพี่เอ่ยเสียงย่อมยอยศใครทั่วลา
وفي الجسم نفس لا تشيب بشيبه ولو أن ما في الوجه منه حراب لها ظفر إن كل ظفر أعده وناب إذا لم يبق في الفم ناب
旅夜抒怀细草微风岸危墙独夜舟星垂平野阔月涌大江流
Amor é um fogo que arde sem se ver. É ferida que dói e não se sente. É um contentamento descontente. É dor que desatina sem doer.
One final question you might ask yourself is, why create poetry? We don't need beauty. What's the point of aesthetics when we can be practical? Well, in his work Symposium, Plato suggested that poetry was a way to become immortal. It is eternal and timeless, self-subsistent and independent. It is not concerned by an earthly manifestation of beauty rather the nature of beauty itself. Write some poetry, create, and live forever. I'm Christian, this is Canguro English. I'll see you in class.